It is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Sunday in April. The 2026 NFL Draft has concluded with the Ravens taking 11 players in this draft. They close out day 3 with 8 selections. We already have podcasts after day 1 and day 2 of the NFL Draft. You can go back and listen to our breakdowns of the picks of Venga Ioane, Zion Young, Jacoby Lane. We're going to focus mostly on day 3, and then we'll give you our overall thoughts on this Ravens draft class. Jonas, we are definitely wanting for sleep. We are a little bit exhausted with all the names and faces that we've had thrown at us over the last couple days, but we're going to try to keep our brains alive and active for at least another hour before we go back to sleep.
Wait,
how you feeling?
I'm so draft addled right now that I was going to make a joke at some point that after this podcast I'm going to watch Beef, and I'm not sure whether I mean the Netflix show or just like film clips of Evan Berenstain, because apparently that's my life right now. Berenstain, sorry, no T. The T is silent.
There we go. T is silent. What's Beef? The Netflix show.
You know, it's the anthology show. That was the one that had Stephen Yeun in the first season, and now it's got Oscar Isaac and Spaney, and yeah, it's about people who have beef, just like the Ravens and Max Crosby come season 3.
That's going to be the topic of season 3. You never know. All right, let's dive into this Ravens draft class. Overall, if you are watching on Facebook, YouTube, or X, you can see the draft class in its totality. Mention the 3 picks on day 1 and day 2. Day 3, the Ravens took 8 players in this draft. 7 of those picks, they stayed at their spot. 1 pick, they traded up for. Round 4, they took 2 players, wide receiver Elijah Surratt and tight end Matthew Hibner. In round 5, they took Chandler Rivers, Josh Cuevas, Adam Randall, and then in round 6, they took punter Ryan Eckley, and they closed out round 7 with Rayshon Benny and Evan Berenson. Jonas, let's start with the selection of wide receiver Elijah Surratt at 115 overall. So the Ravens took Jacoby Lane, who is kind of prototypical X size, may not have the separation skills to be an X receiver, but that's why he's available in the 3rd round. So the Ravens attack that position in the 3rd round, and then they kind of go back at that same prototype in round 4, taking a guy who went to St. Francis Academy in Baltimore, originally from Virginia, former 0-star recruit, spent 1 season at St. Francis University in Pennsylvania, 1 season at JMU, and then he followed his head coach Kurt Cignetti to Indiana, won a national title this past year, had 957 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns in 2024, followed it up with 830 receiving yards and 15 touchdowns in 14 games for the national champions. Jonas, do you think there's a little bit of an overlap here with what the Ravens got in Jacoby Lane? Do you think that Surratt is more an X, or do you think he could be kind of a quote-unquote power slot receiver?
Yeah, that was the takeaway that I had. You had the quote from Eric DeCosta in his post-draft presser where he's just breaking down the guys. He said he's probably a guy that can play outside or inside, but he said we think he's really, really good inside. And that's interesting to me because obviously you do have some of that on its face redundancy with Lane and with Surratt. I think there's definitely a bit of projection there with Surratt because I believe, checking it last night, he only's played something like 50 snaps inside in the slot, according to PFF. Last year at Indiana, I don't think it was a whole lot different the year before. So there's not a lot of film of the guy being a beast inside. Be curious to kind of go and check it out and see if that's something that would work. Again, we don't really know what exactly this Ravens offense is going to look like this year on the field, as we kind of talked about with Dan Pizzuta a couple weeks ago. The Bears offense under Ben Johnson, who Declan Doyle, of course, worked for, a lot of condensed splits. So you're kind of blurring the line between X receiver, slot receiver, Y receiver, Z receiver, all those different types of prototypes. So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, I guess like if you are an optimist, you could say this as the Ravens are taking their chances on 2 guys with good traits, good production. If one of them hits, then Lamar has something that he's never really had before. But if you want to be pessimistic, you can say why did the Ravens double dip at a position when there were other more pressing needs, like quote unquote, like cough center. So we'll see. It was interesting to me that they are very much they won in very much the same kind of way in college. The Ian Hartitz of fantasy guru draft guy put up a chart I think before the draft about how often guys were getting contested targets as part of their just 2025 production profile. And number one and number two, Jacoby Lane, Elijah Surratt. So these guys are having to win at the catch point because they are not yet great route runners in the way of getting the kind of separation that Azay does or Bateman did in 2024. They're having to be strong. They're having to, out muscle guys when the ball arrives. Is that going to be a narrower chance of success when you get to the NFL and you get guys who are stronger than you, faster than you, maybe smarter than you on the other side of the ball? We'll see. We'll see. But I do think certainly ball skills translate, and it's just going to be on the Ravens to kind of figure out what works best for them and what kind of routes are going to be maximal with the abilities that they
so
have.
the Ravens double dip at wide receiver. They also did double dip at tight end, something that we expected them to do. The first of their two tight ends they took was SMU tight end Matthew Hibner, taken at 133 overall. The Ravens traded up for this pick. They traded 154 and a 2027 sixth rounder. It seems like pretty good value to jump up about 20 slots there. 6'4", 251 pounds, 4 seasons at Michigan. So there's a Jesse Minter connection there. And then 2 seasons at SMU, and didn't really break out until he got to SMU as a pass catching tight end. 2025, he had 436 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns in 13 games. According to Lance Zierlein of NFL.com, he is also going to be a special teamer. That's part of his profile as well. Jonas, he seems to fit in behind Mark Andrews and Durham Smythe as the third tight end on this roster, and probably competing with the other tight end, Josh Cuevas, who was taken later on in this draft.
Yeah, my question now with the Ravens depth chart at tight end with these 2 selections is, does this mean that Hibner is now effectively like the backup Y tight end, the guy that you want in line? Because I think it's a solid part of his game, but it's not in an overwhelming part of his game. Even Eric Costa said that there was some projection there. They said that they brought him in for a local pro day because he's from Virginia. He said he's really, really explosive, which shows up in the testing. I think he had an RAS, relative athletic score over 9, over about 9.3. He had an awesome year at receiving tight end. We think he's going to emerge as a blocker as well. He's a great kid. I guess just my worry there is if Durham Smythe falls off or gets hurt, then do you actually have someone in there to be that wide tight end? Because Cuevas, while a good blocker, I think is probably best suited to be your kind of move tight end, H-back, fullback, because he does have the smaller frame. So I thought for sure the Ravens, when they were going to do the double dip, it was like, all right, we're going to take the stiffer, more limited, more big bone tight end at one spot and get the fleeter footed, the more fleet of foot guy with the other one. And it seems like they kind of got maybe, one in Hibner, a guy who is good blocker, good receiver, but not really outstanding at either. And then with Cuevas, they got a little bit more of the versatile, chess piece, the guy that you can move around, who's has good speed up the seam and stuff. And Hibner is athletic. Obviously, I think he ran about a 4.6 40, which is good. But again, I just have some concerns about whether they got enough depth for a position that is really, really critical for the team that kind of wants to run the type of zone run schemes and gap schemes that the Ravens we think are going to under Declan Doyle. And
Josh Cuevas, the 5th round pick by the Ravens out of Alabama, senior from Los Angeles, 2 years at Cal Poly, 1 at Washington, the last 2 at Alabama, 411 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns. In between these 2 tight ends was sandwiched Duke cornerback Chandler Rivers, 5'9", 185 pounds. He is a senior from Beaumont, Texas. He is not massive, as I just listed his measurables there. Not huge, has kind of short arms, but according to Lance Zierlein, punches above his weight class when he's jamming at the line of scrimmage. Ravens obviously have their three starters in place. We assume, obviously, Nate Wiggins is going to start. Marlon Humphrey is going to start probably in the slot. They brought back Chidobe Awuzie, who is most likely, if they were to start a game today, would be their other outside cornerback. But then they have TJ Tampa. They have Robert Longerbeam. They have Bilal Kone. They've got Keon Martin. These are guys that I think perhaps Jesse Minter's staff could give fresh eyes to, and maybe there's a little bit of a so one of these guys that I just mentioned could have a little bit of a breakout, especially something to watch in training camp.
Yeah, and Rivers seems like he could be the steal of this draft class. And he was expected to be a day 2 pick. I think he was more so in that round 3 consideration, just because he's durable. He was, he had great on ball production. He was able to survive in the ACC at that smaller frame, but you could easily move him inside, have him be, the among the shorter slot cornerbacks. Eric DeCosta invoked Tavon Young, Lardarius Webb as guys who maybe didn't have the prototypical frame, but just knew ball. And it seems like Chandler Rivers definitely knows ball. So it's gonna be interesting to see just how well he kind of holds up with some of the more physical aspects of the game. One of the kind of demerits on his profile was he really struggled against Skylar Bell, the UConn wide receiver, who I think went in the 4th or 5th round yesterday. Extremely productive, had great games against pretty much everyone last year. But there were, I think, he did point at some of the deficiencies in Rivers' game, just like the ability to get off blocks, the ability to tackle in space when you're going up against athletes who are maybe you're equal, maybe you're superior. But I just think that when you can play the kind of different modes that Rivers can, where you can get someone's face and mirror them in press coverage, you can be capable in off coverage and reading out the concept that is as it's developing, then you're going to set yourself up for success. And as we know, this was a cornerback position that the Ravens needed to address in some way at some point with a good player. And I think Chandler Rivers is definitely a good player. And the fact that he could play outside, can play inside, gives you some comfort if one of these guys, knock on wood, goes down. Because we don't know what Bilal Kone is going to be this year, coming back from that terrible, terrible preseason injury last year. And Robert Longerbeam, probably wasn't going to make the team last year, if not for that injury that allowed him to just go on season-ending IR. So even if you're optimistic about Kone and his long-term potential in Baltimore, which I am, just because of some of the athletic traits that he has, I think it would have been malpractice to not try to find a guy who can come in and be one of these cheap young contracts who can give you good snaps if you absolutely need to.
Another 5th round pick. Clemson running back Adam Randall, senior from Myrtle Beach. He is 6'3", 232 pounds. He's big for a running back. He was a converted wide receiver, spent 3 seasons as a wide receiver, and then only really his final season, 2025, was he a full-time RB. 814 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns, but also racked up over 250 receiving yards for 3 receiving touchdowns. He's got kick return ability. Also, though, Jonas, it is important to note that this was the first pick that was made by Ravens owner Steve Bisciotti. Eric DeCosta said Bisciotti wanted to make a draft pick, and the Ravens said, we'll give you our last 5th round pick for you to do all the research on and make your selection. My question for you, Jonas, is if Banner owner Stuart Bainham came to you and said, Jonas, I'd like to write the game story for Ravens week 3 of the 2026 season, would you hand him the reins?
I think I would have to, but I would also tell him that, Stuart, I'm going to be checking to make sure that you don't have ChatGPT write this story.
Come on. You don't.
There are ways that we can detect.
Let's assume more of Stuart Bainham.
He's got a lot on his plate. If he wants to stick his name on the byline and go about his merry way and do other more important rich businessman stuff, by all means, go ahead and do it. My question for you, Paul, inspired by this bit of history that we saw here with Steve Bisciotti, is like, who is the richest person who's ever called your phone? Because we know Steve Bisciotti's net worth is in the billions, and he called Adam Randall, who, by the way, we should say, like, he's gotten to know a little bit because of his connections to the Clemson program. Eric DeCosta mentioned that Steve Bisciotti is close with Dabo Swinney there. Obviously, when the Ravens took Nate Wiggins a couple of years ago, I think Dabo was kind of crowing about how he knew that Nate would be the pick there for the Ravens because of his connections to Steve. But I don't know if I've ever had any rich person
No, you've
call
had a lot
me
of yeah, like
directly.
former players call you, and they obviously have $1,000,000
Yeah,
contracts, but
players,
that's
coaches.
nowhere near
I,
billions.
I
I
just
mean, there are,
no.
you know, a lot of millions in a billion, 1,000 even. Yeah, I would have to go through my phone list. I don't think I've come anywhere close to even a $1,000,000,000 person calling my phone. Um, in terms of the player of Adam Randall, Jonas, you see a guy who is 6'3", 232 pounds, drafted as the Ravens running back, and you think, is this guy a potential long-term replacement for Derrick Henry? But Derrick Henry's under contract for 2 more seasons. I mean, the Ravens are almost definitely, the way his contract is structured, they're not going to move on most likely after 2026 unless something dramatic happens. And obviously, he's coming off another 1,500 rushing season, yard rushing season. So, he is still chugging along. Do you think there's a little bit too much overlap with Derrick Henry here? Or were you surprised at all that the Ravens went with this kind of running back after they lost Keaton Mitchell, who is, the smaller, as you call him, tiny horse kind of flash out of the backfield? Were you surprised they went with a bigger bodied back here?
I don't really think I care too much about the profile. I think he's fun to watch, man. I mean,
He
you
is.
turn on the highlight tape and his gear is pretty insane, and the fact that there is room to grow because he is this converted receiver, that gives you some optimism about what he could be. Again, I think if we're talking like what is the 60th, 70th percentile outcome for him, it's him turning into like a good backup running back. I don't know if someone who's literally as tall as this and just this late to the position, you could ever really say with any confidence that he's going to become a starting running back in the NFL, much less a good starting running back in the NFL. But the frame gives you some confidence that he could be a competent blocker. The speed gives you some confidence that he could be a potential contributor in the return game. Obviously, he did have some good receiving production, 254 receiving yards, 3 touchdown catches. That's good to see. And, I don't think a need here was as urgent as it was at, say, cornerback, but Justice Hill's coming off a season where he basically had a season-ending neck injury that it seems like he's, recovered from in his back practice. Rasheen Ali has, a bit of a checkered history of kind of minor nicks and bruises that have sidelined him at points. And obviously with Derrick Henry, he's, fighting the biggest battle of them all, of just, battling father time. And we assume that he's going to be 95% of what he was last year. But what if it's 80? What if it's 70? You're going to need to be able to pick up the pieces elsewhere. So I think it was an interesting pick. Didn't really have a fifth round running back on my bingo board, but he is definitely a fun player to watch. And I'm curious to see just how much he flashes during the preseason, if
Derrick
at
Henry
all.
continues to stave off father time, but Jonas, the biggest battle of all was actually the Battle of Kursk, apparently, which was fought on the Eastern Front in 1943. The biggest battle of all is not actually against father time.
Are we talking total personnel on both sides or
This
casualties or
was a
what?
quick Google search. Looks like a lot of people were involved here. Operation Citadel. Oh my gosh. Material loss. Wow. 177,000 casualties on one side and 54,000 casualties on
Whoa.
another. That's pretty crazy. Um,
Oh man, I can't wait to play this in Call of Duty.
Canceled. All right. Sixth round pick, punter Ryan Eckley out of Michigan State, redshirt junior from Florida. Jonas, last year it was the sixth round kicker that you were watching very closely in training camp. Will you be watching the punting battle as well?
I I guess so. Yeah.
It's a lot harder
do,
to track,
do
right?
you want me to bring a?
Than kicking.
I know. I remember. I think I remember reading some coverage from a Packers writer pre-COVID. I don't know if it was like a new signing or a a rookie that they drafted, but he literally brought a stopwatch to practice and would time the hang time of the punts just to show that this guy was good or not good. I don't know if I'm going to be that
Is
level of
that
hardo when it
was
comes to
that
Ryan Eckley.
Syracuse's own Matthew Schneidman?
I think it was Matthew Cohen,
Yeah.
and I think it was
Oh,
Matthew Cohen, not
man.
Schneidman.
I don't know if he went to
Yeah.
Syracuse, but that's impressive. All right. Well, that sounds like you've just signed yourself up for that.
Do you want to come out to practice and time him yourself?
Not really. I'll be honest. Yeah, it looks like the Ravens got the replacement here for Jordan Stout. You'd think, you'd hope, right?
Yeah, I mean, selfishly, I was hoping for the Aussie that they would bring in Clayton. What's his name? Brett Thorson.
Because he's a redhead.
Yeah, Brett Thorson. Just because seemed like a good hang. I mean, it was good to know Eckley yesterday. Seemed like a very nice guy, very chill guy, which I think is about the baseline expectation for these punters. But yeah, Thorson had the accent. He had a better hang time when it came to the NFL. He was also the Ray Guy Award winner, so he was technically more productive in the eyes of the college evaluators last year. I think probably the main difference and probably the differentiator between Eckley and Thorson was the fact that Eckley has a lot of experience as a holder, and that's an important part of the special teams operation, is just not screwing things up for the kicker. And I believe that was a limitation or a question mark on Thorson's resume, whereas this is something that Eckley has done for 4 years now and feels really good about it. So even if maybe you could say that Thorson had a slightly better leg, a little bit more consistent, maybe a little bit more pro ready, you can't be going into every field goal, every extra point, worrying about whether the guy who's going to be catching a very quickly propelled ball and holding it for you with the laces out is going to be doing his job. You just can't kind of plant that seed of doubt, especially with everything that Tyler Loop is going to be dealing with mentally this year. So it's understandable, and obviously you trust Randy Brown to make that evaluation and give Eric DeCosta the guy that he needs to keep the special teams decent.
And then 2 7th-round picks. Michigan defensive lineman Rayshon Benny. You hear Michigan, and you think of Jesse Minter, 5 years at Michigan, 2023 national champion, 1.5 sacks each of the last 2 seasons. And then finally, the Ravens draft somebody who could play center, technically, Northwestern offensive lineman Evan Berenson. He is a senior from Green Bay, Wisconsin, 6'3", 311 pounds. Started his college career in 2019. He's an older prospect. We'll talk about the trends, and we'll get to how many of these guys are older prospects. Started at South Dakota State, spent several years there, played 13 games at right guard for Northwestern in 2025, but might have to move to center because he certainly lacks length. And Jonas, when you look at this class overall, I saw you tweeting about it yesterday at Jonas_Shaffer. I did read your mentions, and people were getting on your case, calling it a borderline obsession with the Ravens not drafting a center. What would you like to say to the haters that think you may be obsessed with the Ravens' inability to take a center in this draft?
I just think that, like, if you're talking about what the Ravens wanted out of this draft, like, you are putting together a suit for the coming season, and you've got the nice jacket, you got the nice undershirt, you got some nice pants, you've got some nice shoes. But if you come to your function and you don't have a left sock or a right sock or both pairs of socks, you're going to look kind of ridiculous. And, like, the Ravens, as of right now, have Danny Pinter and Corey Bullock as their top 2 options. And I really like Bullock. He's like a very smart guy, but I think it was telling that last year, despite everything that he showed us in preseason, that was pretty promising. He couldn't do much to get on the field at a guard spot, and that was a position that he played at. So I just think that because of where this line has been, and we've seen how damaging, like, the weak link theory can be when it's applied in real life. Like, the Ravens had 2 very poor starters last year, and that sabotaged their offense at times, with Andrew Voorhees not really being up to snuff and Daniel Faalele just being very hot and cold with his play there.
Mostly
So
cold.
even if you feel good, even if you feel good about the other four guys around them, defenses are smart, man. Coordinators are smart. They're going to find a way to take a limitation for you and just drill at it and chip away and chip away and chip away. So I think it was a little bit confusing that the Ravens, even if they missed on the two guys that they thought could be potential plug and play starters, just didn't bring in someone that, you know, before the seventh round who could be a developmental piece. And maybe by week 10 or week 12, he gives you more than some of the guys that you already have on this roster just because of their athletic traits. So I just think that if anything, if we learn anything from last year, it's to not leave yourself thin at one position. Like the Ravens had a couple good starters on the offensive line, but they were so critically underserved depth wise at the guard spots that they couldn't do anything about the struggles of Voorhees or Falele. Like Emory Jones, probably if he'd come in healthier and that rehab hadn't been as long winded as it was, might have been able to push one of those guys for snaps. But the Ravens just couldn't find answers for those guys at either spot. And now you're talking about going into this season for the time being, at least with Danny Pinter, a guy who has 10 starts over 5 seasons. Corey Bullock, a guy who's really never had any kind of significant action in any game in the NFL. Berenson is it going to be any better than them? You would imagine in year one. So I just kind of wonder, based on everything that we saw last year, like why Eric DeCosta just didn't take a chance on a guy, even if he thought maybe, I'm not going to announce this with my full chest. I just that is my issue with the Ravens. Just you're a little bit underdressed given everything that went on last year and given how much of a need this was from the day that Tyler Linderbaum told you he was
Yeah,
going to Vegas.
I was very surprised that the Ravens did not come out of this draft with a better plan at center. And Eric DeCosta said after the draft that we will have a plan, and that it is somewhat early, in the process. They obviously don't play games until September. They have time to do this. They could go out and sign a center if they wanted to. Some names that come to mind. You think of Ethan Posick. He's coming off Achilles surgery that he suffered in December when he was playing with the Browns. Graham Glasgow is still out there, but he has really fallen off.
James Daniels.
Yeah, there are still some guys out there, and now the comp pick formula doesn't come into play because it is after the draft, but still you're not feeling great after leaving this draft without a real plan. We should also mention that they reportedly signed Penn State center Nick Dawkins as an undrafted free agent, 5 years in college, 2 years as a starter, and last year was a team captain for Penn State. And I know Gianna Hahn will be happy about that. But when asked about this center class overall, Eric DeCosta said the guys that they liked were mostly in the second round. The Ravens took Zion Young, edge rusher out of Missouri, with their second round pick at number 45 overall. Logan Jones went 57th overall to the Chicago Bears, another team who lost their center this offseason, went to retirement. He was a consensus 95th overall prospect. So he went way ahead of his consensus spot. And then Jake Slaughter was another second round pick who went 63rd overall to the LA Chargers. He was a consensus 93rd overall prospect. The Ravens weren't on the clock again until 80th overall. So they missed on both those guys. But Jonas, I said a few days ago, there's nothing wrong with being the first team to take a position. Unless you're taking somebody way out of position, like you're taking a punter in the second round, there's nothing wrong with being aggressive to get the guy that you want. And you had the ammunition. The Ravens had 8 day 3 picks. They had picks in 2027 that they could draw from because they're going to get compensatory picks next year and probably the year after that. So they're going to be flush with draft picks. So to narrow your view so much so that you really only focus on 2 guys and then say, we don't like anybody else enough to take it. Like, really? There were 11 centers drafted in this draft overall. I just thought that the Ravens would come away with somebody that at least by the time they got to the 5th or 6th round, they'd say, let's take some dart throws here. And instead, they go with a running back at one point a pick that they let their owner make, and they don't come away with a true center in this draft, they could be fine. And center is not a position that you need to draft early. I get it. The Ravens have found gems in the past through undrafted free agency and through late round picks. I mean, Jason Kelsey was a 6th round pick, for goodness sakes. But if we get to the regular season and center is an issue, you can't say that we didn't see it coming.
Yeah, and I'm I am sympathetic toward just the process in general because I wrote a story about just the kind of predictive draft boards that these teams have, especially the Ravens, and they are products of information that you get that is privileged. It's products of the uh, wider consensus boards, what teams are expecting, what experts are projecting, what scouts are projecting, and the talk on this center class was that the run would start in the 3rd and 4th round. And because of how relatively early the Ravens were picking in that 3rd round, I think it probably made sense to Eric DaCosta. We are going to find at least one of our guys before this run starts or as this run is getting going. And for Logan Jones to go way ahead of anyone else, and for Jake Slaughter to be drafted by Eric DaCosta's old homie Joe Ortiz and not even be the projected starting center there in LA because they already have a center in Tyler Biadasz, who they signed, after the kind of change up into Washington, is probably just doubly devastating to what Eric wanted from this draft. And, you could say that if the Ravens go Benga Ioane, Zion Young, Logan Jones, Elijah Surratt, like that is to me the makings of like an A draft because you have addressed so many needs at so many spots and done it with good value. But again, it just comes back to like the Ravens weren't prepared for what might happen, or I guess they were prepared for what might happen, but their options at that spot, if they were that thin, then maybe you should have been a little bit more proactive in making sure that you were going to get the guy rather than just assuming that these two key players at this key spot were going to
Yeah.
fall to you. It's just that is, I think, to me, the issue when you are Monday morning quarterbacking this. It's like if there was this scarcity in your mind of prospects, and this was a position that you absolutely needed to fill coming into the draft, like just to kind of restate what I said yesterday, Spencer Fano was higher on my own personal big board for the Ravens than Vega Ioane because of that center versatility that we think he has. To go in and wait until the 7th round to get a guy who might play center, it is just I don't want to say it's unforgivable because Eric DaCosta is going to be able to find someone who can play that center position. But um, we could be talking at this point next year, a couple of days before the draft starts, about how the Ravens need a center because they didn't do it
Yeah,
the previous
the
year.
plan for this spot needs to be better than the Ravens' plan for both guard spots last year. I mean, they had a plan for both guard spots last year, and the plans didn't work in Daniel Falele and Andrew Voorhees. So I'm sure they will find somebody, but that somebody has to be good. And to kind of throw your hands up and say, well, the board didn't fall our way, you have agency in this. You have draft picks you can trade, and it is your responsibility to know how the draft board is going to fall. I'm not saying they need to predict everything, but Eric DaCosta has all kinds of prediction models at his hands. He can pick up the phone and make some calls and try to figure out who is going to go where. And it is his responsibility at the end of the day to know generally where these guys are going to be picked. So I was just a little bit surprised that the Ravens didn't come out of this draft with an offensive with anybody who can play center until the 7th round. And furthermore, Eric DaCosta talked after the pick of Venga Ioane about how they haven't invested as much in the offensive line. He said, we want to be a strong, imposing team. We probably haven't invested as many resources in the offensive line recently. And I think what a lot of people, when they saw that quote, thought was he's admitting that they haven't invested enough. But he didn't say that. He said we just haven't invested as much recently in the offensive line. And yes, the Ravens got maybe the best offensive lineman in this draft with Venga Ioane in the 1st round, and that can't go unspoken. But they then don't take another offensive lineman until their last pick in this draft. I mean, even if it wasn't a center, even if it wasn't another guard, Roger Rosengarten's play fell off a lot in 2025. Ronnie Stanley is a consistent injury risk, and their backup tackle right now is Carson Vinson, who was taken as a project in the 5th round last year. So it could have been numerous positions that they could have addressed here. Overall, I think that the class is still strong. You got a lot of good talent here. I just don't know if they fully check the box of investing as many resources as they could have in protecting Lamar Jackson and in opening running lanes for Derrick Henry, which ultimately is hugely important to their success in 2026.
Yeah. I'll just kind of wind this down with two thoughts. One, just to reiterate what we'd said in our offensive line preview podcast, I think a couple weeks ago. In the 21st century, only one rookie has been a starting center on a Super Bowl winning team. That was Dan Coppin, who was a 5th round pick of the Patriots in 2003. But even then, he began the season as the backup to Pro Bowl center Damien Woody, who got knocked from that starting position because of injury. And I think eventually slotted in at guard. So it is very, very rare that you have a center come in and be the anchor in the middle of a Super Bowl winning team. Creed Humphrey, I mentioned in that podcast, also made the Super Bowl as a rookie, as a every game starter. But maybe it's a blessing in disguise that the Ravens aren't handing the reins over to a first-year player in a position as crucial as that. Maybe they find someone in free agency. Maybe they trade for someone. Maybe it's someone already on the roster. And that is, to me, I think, the interesting part of all this. Like, if the idea is to find the best 5 offensive linemen on this team that you're going to put there as your starters, like, could we get a little bit crazy with the configurations? Could Emory Jones be a center? Could Vega Ioane be the center in year one? We know he has some experience there. It's definitely not his best position. Could Andrew Voorhees, like, if the Ravens are kind of reach a fire drill state of things where anyone who's 6'3" and less than 310 pounds gets a shot at handling things at that pivot position, could Andrew Voorhees be an option to step in there? I know that would cause a lot of PTSD with this Ravens fan base, but I'm just curious to see, like, what their options become if they don't actually bring in someone or don't find someone in this rookie class who they really like. And I just think it's interesting that, like, there are enough really appealing options for this team that it wouldn't surprise me if the Ravens, like, use a lot of 6-man offensive line formations in the same way that the Bills did last year because of just the strength that they have in some of these spots. Like, if Emory Jones turns out to be like a really, really good player, but you just don't have a spot for him, maybe you throw him out there as that quasi tight end and just try to bully teams the same way that Buffalo did last year. But again, if you can't find a competent center among that bunch, then you are kind of cutting yourself off
Sure.
the pass.
Jonas, one other theme from this draft, the age of some of these players. It was a topic of conversation coming into the draft because Eric DaCosta talked about how NIL, the COVID seasons are over, by the way. There's really nobody who's impacted by those extra years for the most part. I don't think anybody, although the one guy who started his college career in 2019, I think may technically be affected by the COVID years, and maybe he got an extra year there. But
Yeah.
overall, it's a lot of NIL. These guys stay in college longer. Eric DaCosta said, the average age for a lot of these draft picks has gone up. That being said, were you surprised that the Ravens took Tyler Hibner, who just turned 24? They took Elijah Surratt, who turns 23 in about a month, so not terribly old. They took Rayshon Benny, who turns 25 in a couple of weeks. And then their final pick in Berenson turns 26 in September. A lot of older guys. The Ravens like to draft young guys when they can.
Yeah, they've drafted some older guys in recent
Hayden
years,
Hurst.
but they have not done. Yeah, well, even that, like, Andrew Voorhees was in USC for a while. Saleh, the big offensive lineman from Oregon, I think came in as a 23 or 24-year-old. They haven't really had a lot of great returns on those guys. Again, it's a small sample size, so you don't want to extrapolate it to what it means for this class. But I think all of the like kind of beige flags that Eric DaCosta raised with just this kind of prospect in general apply to this class. It's like they've put a lot more miles on their odometer than your 20, 21-year-old prospects. There's not as much room for athletic growth because you're, spending another year or two or three in a college weight room to get stronger. And are you, winning as a prospect? Are you getting open? Are you making a block? Are you, making a tackle because you are a better football player or just because you are that much older than the competition that you're going up against every week in the Big Ten or the Mountain West or the, Patriot League or whatever. So it's a little bit of a thing to monitor. Like, is Hibner actually going to be that much better in year three than he is in year one? I guess we'll see. Is Brayshawn Benny going to come in as a more physically developed player because he is going to be 25 when training camp starts in September than he would have been as they kind of same level of prospects as a 22-year-old? Uh, Probably not, but that might be a good thing for where the Ravens need some depth there up front. But yeah, this is, as Eric DeCosta said, kind of the new reality with NIL, and we might be getting, the 5 years of eligibility in 5 years overall proposition that seems to be kind of making its way through the NCAA, where you're going to have some of these older guys who just, the clock doesn't run out after 4 years if you start as a true freshman. So it's just something the Ravens are going to have to navigate along with the rest of the NFL.
Jonas, what is your draft grade and what are your overall impressions of this draft? Like, what do you think who are some of the winners and losers? What do you think the overall kind of legacy of this draft will be?
I think it's a B for me. I think, they did what they had to with three of their first four picks. They got Lamar help. They added a necessary complement to Trey Hendrickson. I think the way that I saw it best on Yahoo Sports was like, if you sign Trey Hendrickson, you have to draft someone like Zion Young, which I think is a very, very fair description. I think, Yoane is going to come in and be, we think, a plug and play starter, and not only a plug and play starter, but probably a damn good one in year one. But again, it just comes back to basically, did they do enough at center? Did they do enough along the defensive line with the uncertainty with Nami Badabike and Broderick Washington coming back from the Achilles? Do they have enough resources and quality in the trenches to kind of overcome what befell them last year? So I think obviously there are a lot of interesting ways that we are going to see this draft in hindsight. It's going to be known as the draft where the Ravens didn't have a first round pick and they did because of the Max Crosby situation. It's going to be, did the Ravens make the pick with the right pick between Venga and Ruben Bain? Is this the draft where the Ravens got Lamar the kind of help that he's needed as a X receiver, possession receiver, big bodied receiver? Surratt and Lane are, I think, the first receivers the Ravens have drafted who are over 6'1" since Miles Boykin in 2019. Is that going to change the kind of paradigm for Lamar and for this offense and what it could be based on what the kind of defenses that have been playing the Ravens? We'll see. But again, I think this is, as you expect from an Eric DeCosta draft, this is good process, good outcomes, but it did leave me wanting more at some of the key spots we've already talked about.
The Ravens just saw a lot of members of an outstanding draft class from 2022 walk out the door in free agency. That was the draft class that started with Kyle Hamilton, Tyler Linderbaum, David Ajabo. They had Travis Jones, Daniel Falele, Charlie Kohler, Jordan Stout, Isaiah Likely taken in that draft. That was a massive draft class that paid huge dividends for the Ravens. I think it would be unfair to kind of place that extra pressure or expectations on this draft class because the Ravens had 2 first-round picks in that draft. They had a bunch of fourth-rounders, whereas in this draft, the Ravens just had several fifth-round picks. But they're hoping to get a lot of impact from this draft class. They're hoping that they've gotten a perennial All-Pro or Pro Bowler in Venga Ioane. They're hoping that they got a good complement on the edge to Trey Hendrickson and Zion Young. They're hoping that they've solved the X problem that they've had with Lamar Jackson for quite a while with one of their wide receivers in Jacoby Lane and Elijah Surratt. And then they've double dipped at tight end like they like to do. So this could be another hugely impactful draft class. You just hope that the Ravens addressed the right spots. You hope that they made enough additions in the trenches, which to me was by far the most important thing coming into this offseason. I think as we get further along into the offseason, we'll look back on this draft and try to offer our evaluations. We're going to have James Foster on at some point, I think, during the week to look back at this draft class. In the meantime, you can read everything that Jonas and Gianna Hahn and Kyle Goon have written on thebanner.com.
Shout out to the Baltimore Banner,
where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. Jonas, are you ready to get some sleep?
I got some sleep last night. I'm good. I just need to go mow the lawn. It's looking a little shaggy right now.
Well, it's raining here in Baltimore, so maybe waiting for that to dry. Thank you so much for following along all draft weekend. We really appreciate it. Had a lot of fun bringing these shows to you. If you like the podcast, write us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and I will read it out here on the show. Like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano. We'll have another episode for you coming